Parliament has approved the Public Service Amendment Bill, a move experts say could reshape governance in this country. The bill draws a clear line between political and administrative powers, aiming to prevent politicians from interfering in day-to-day departmental operations and appointments. The reform emphasizes merit-based appointments and seeks to curb cadre deployment, marking what many describe as a historic turning point. Let's unpack it all. I'm joined by Julius Kleynhans of OUTA, the organization undoing tax abuse, as well as Yoliswa Makhasi, head of Public Service Reform Program at the New South Institute. Good afternoon to the both of you. Let me start with a broad question. The writer Fidelis Zwomuya, writing about the processes leading up to where we are right now, described the testimony during the public hearings as dry, technical, but yet utterly consequential, and went on to say that this is a piece of legislation so dense it really makes headlines. Yoliswa, why should it matter? We're saying that it's so dense, policy dense, it's for the boffins and people who are that way oriented, the nerds, the policy nerds, but why does it matter for everyone?
I don't know. I hope that I'll be able to answer this question as a policy nerd myself.
Yes.
But
that's why
I do want
you.
to say this, this policy matters because it's about changing how things are done in the public service. It's about bringing in a different way of doing things to ensure that there is delivery of services and to ensure that there is improvement in terms of accountability. But more importantly, the policy does a few things. Firstly, it cushions public administration from politics in the sense that, firstly, it devolves administrative powers that the Public Service Act, since democracy, has given to political principals, which we call executive authorities. So that power is being devolved from, that administrative power is being devolved from politicians to the administrators. In terms of public administration philosophy, that's how it should have been from 1994, because politicians deal with the how. The how involves setting policy, setting strategy, and focusing. They deal with the what, apologies, the what. Setting policy, setting strategy, as well as focusing on their constitutional mandates and responsibilities. The administration, which is led by a director general or a head of department, focuses on the how, which is about bringing in technical expertise to be able to deliver on the policy ideals and the strategy, and to support the executive authority in delivering on their roles, but also delivering services to South Africans beyond supporting the executive authority. So that's one major issue that's coming out of the amendments. The second one is, again, aimed at separating politics from administration by ensuring that those people who report to heads of departments, be it in a province or in a national government, they are there is a political limitation for them. They cannot be part of executive committee structures of political organizations, because they cannot sit in the executive committee and take political decisions about how things should be done and then come into government to be driving that implementation. There is a risk, whether some say it's a perceived risk, some say it's a real risk, but there is a risk and there is a conflict of interest in relation to that.
Yeah.
So those are the two major issues. The third issue that has been bothering us in public administration when I was still in the space is the fact that there are the challenge of political administrative interface, the relationships between ministers or MECs or executive authorities and their heads of administration. Sometimes they collapse to the extent that that results to instability in the system. So there's constraints. And part of these constraints are triggered by this ambiguity in roles and responsibilities. I think other things really have to do with personalities, and you can't legislate personalities. But at the core of the legislation as well is to ensure that career incidents of heads of departments are given attention, and the legislation now directly delegates the head of the presidency, the DG in the presidency, as a head of administration responsible to work around these particular issues and ensure that
Sure.
these career incidents, when they happen, they are given attention.
Julius, Kleynhans, just from your perspective, what is the mischief that this amendment is meant to address? What has been the cost up until now of not clearly delineating the lines between political as well as administrative streams of government and who's responsible for what? I mean, it's something that's playing itself out live as we speak. For example, in this case of the police minister versus the director general in the police being the National Police Commissioner.
Absolutely. And one cannot help but to ask again, legislation is great, but the way it's implemented and enforced is really what matters. So regardless of new legislation, even if the current political office bearers who's failed in a lot of these segments to ensure that there's proper professionalized service delivery, if they are the ones that needs to put this policy in place and again, even have, let's say, on the sidelines, political interference and influence without consequences or any action that's taken against them, I don't think we'll see a change. So it's cost the economy a lot. We've seen job losses and the economic decline, which is significant, impacting every South African. And one has to remember that the government is a vehicle that creates the foundation of South Africa to ensure that us as South Africans become productive, that we've got the ability to work, that we've got access to good health care, and that we are safe in our community. And that's significantly failed. Every South African is feeling that. And that has a lot to do with the professional infrastructure and people that we have in office. What we also need to keep in mind is there's a lot of people now in government that are really good people. But there are also a lot of people that are incapable of doing their work properly. And we also need the unions to support this kind of policy to ensure that when we start professionalizing government, that everyone's on board to ensure that South Africa turns the tide and that everyone stimulates the economy. What I am concerned about it also is it focuses a lot on national government at the PMFMA, but local government is where we live. And I think there's still a big gap there. If you look at councillors and a political influence by municipality, the same rules should apply. We need professional people because that's where we live, it's where we go to work, it's where our kids go to school. And hopefully this is the start of a new beginning.
Is that where the gaps are, Julius, if I stick with you? Is that where the gaps are in this amendment bill, its applicability at the provincial and local government? But also I read somewhere about the question of how directors general are appointed as people who head up the administrative arm in that delineated dispensation.
Yeah, look, Director General was always the administrative arm, and in a municipality or counting officer, a municipal manager is supposed to be there. Now, if you look at the budgets with these entities, your state-owned entities and your municipalities, Johannesburg sits with a budget of 80 billion rand as an example. And look at the quality of those leaders, the CEO of the municipality or the company. Are they really qualified? Are they seasoned? And then look at the boards. That is scary. You know, we've seen the inadequate boards and the lack of oversight. The mischief that we've seen in South Africa hasn't happened overnight. And I think there's a lot of people that's been involved. So one of the biggest gaps is we need stronger oversight and protection of professional administrators, but also the implementation capacity that we currently have is very weak. So the bill must accompany training and budgeting and oversight properly. And then lastly, a strong enforcement mechanism to ensure that political manipulation may not continue informally.
So, Yoliswa Makhasi, let me end it off with you. The question was asked of Director of New South Institute, Ivo Chipkin, about whether it is possible to have a clear cut between political and administrative. And his answer was, the answer was a no, and saying that it can never be, but perhaps these are the beginnings of trying to entrench that divide. How does how do the changes introduced by this bill and eventually when it becomes an act gauge and stack up against how other democracies work in this area? For example, the United States and their system where it's almost like a clean out at certain levels of government when a new administration takes over.
Well, our system is definitely different from the United States system because our system requires that there must be continuity in terms of governance in the public service. So that issue about the separation of politics and public administration, I'm quite careful not to say take away politics from public administration because public administration is about public policy and politics are embedded in public policy. But the implementers who are in public administration, there is a need definitely to have some insulation in terms of that particular area of the work. So from that point of view, you can, through the legislation, and it's not operating alone in a vacuum. There's other pieces of policies and information that is very useful. One of them is the professionalization framework. For instance, already on the issue of appointment of DGs, it's already expressing itself. Certainly, we have to have a different way in which we bring in heads of departments and senior managers in the public service. We have to strengthen the meritocracy process. We have to strengthen the independence in terms of the recruitment itself. The NSI is doing some work on that. I think in a month or two, we will be releasing some paper in relation to that with recommendations. So there's still lots of work to be done, but what is important is to keep an eye on implementation once these amendments have been approved as legislation. And I hope that the departments responsible have already started talking about implementation and putting their systems in place.
All right, let's leave it there for this afternoon. Fascinating conversation, and I do hope we will get to have these conversations even more as this legislation makes its way, perhaps all the way to the desk of the president. Yoliswa Makhasi, Head of Public Service Reform Program at the New South Institute. We were, of course, also joined by Julius Kleynhans of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, that is OUTA.